Um, do you kind of want to explain what you do? Just broad.
Yeah, you want me to just introduce myself?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So my name is Brianna Loop, and I am by license a social worker. I'm a licensed independent clinical social worker here in the state of Minnesota. And my education included going to get my BA in psychology. And then after my undergraduate work, I opted to go into the field of social work for my master's program, and I graduated with a clinical uh, social work license, or excuse me, I graduated from a clinical social work master's program, and then from there went on to get licensed. Um, Currently, I work at the Minneapolis VA Medical Center, and I work in the mental health department. I have for the last 13 years, and I have been as a social worker in mental health, I have worked as a therapist. So, in psychotherapy, I've gotten to see clients individually. I've gotten to do couple work. I've worked extensively with groups of veterans. And currently, I am practicing most of the time on our inpatient mental health unit. And I also provide supervision, meaning that other folks who are working as social workers and they're looking to get to that higher level of licensure in our field, and I provide them clinical supervision. And so that's another part of my job. And so, which leads me to my other job that I have as a teacher, a professor at the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul, Minnesota, and I called clinical supervision at St. Thomas.
Awesome. Okay. So, what sort of material do you cover in class?
So the folks who are in the program have a good idea of what the field of social work is all about. And when they come to my class, they are either in the middle of an internship or about to start an internship. And so the class that I teach is all about the relationship that an intern has with their supervisor. And usually, when you go out into the field of social work, you will have a supervisor, at least initially in your career, for that, at least for that first part. Sometimes people have a supervisor throughout their whole career. And so the class really focuses and centers on that relationship of how do you use the relationship with your supervisor to deepen the work that you're doing, to inform um, your personal growth as a clinician in the work that you're doing with your clients. And then the other portion of the class is talking about how do you manage a program. So if you were to work in a mental health department and if you were the manager of that mental health department, what are the things you need to know about managing groups of people? Essentially, it's all about leadership skills, right? So we talk a lot about leading, we talk a lot about how to use yourself um, in the relationships that you are making and having with everybody, and how your own personal values and morals and ethics impact the work that you do. Does that make sense?
Yes. Um,
Okay.
so,
Okay.
how did the way you grew up affect your decision on helping veterans? Or
Ooh, good
was there any?
question. So, I, I'm sorry, is there a delay?
There's a little bit, but go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm sorry. So what was the second part you said? I heard the question and then you said something else and I didn't hear you.
Oh yeah, just ignore that. I was just like clarifying, but
Okay.
I think you understood.
Okay. Yeah, so the question is, what was it, or what was it like growing up, or what led me to the work that I was doing with veterans? Sorry, did I
Yes.
get that right,
Yeah.
Jaden? Okay. Um, so I think two things. One, growing up, I had parents in my life who they themselves went through some hard things. Um, and my, I think I come from a family where there was a lot of pain and a lot of suffering, and including some mental health symptoms that my family and extended family had to navigate and deal with. And so part of my journey into mental health work was wanting to make sense out of those experiences that my extended family and my parents, and then my friends and the people I was around, like I just started to realize that mental health symptoms and managing a person's mental health and how to do that well, that was all around me. And I really wanted to understand that. I wanted to understand my own emotions and my own feelings. I wanted to understand how to um, manage life as effectively as I could. And so part of me wanting to go into the field of mental health was to understand my own situation and my family and my own relationships more. Specifically, I got interested in working with veterans when I was in graduate school. And I grew up, my grandpa was a Korean War veteran. My dad is a Vietnam, your grandpa is a Vietnam War veteran of the Navy. And I then went on to have a brother who joined, your uncle Mike, joined the military. He was in the Army. And then I also had a brother-in-law who was a Marine. And so I just got really interested in the experience of people who had been in the military and how unique that experience was and how unique that population's needs were. I got really curious about the things that made them both similar and different from or set apart from anyone else moving through life. Um, and again, I knew I wanted to be in a helping profession. I knew I wanted to be in a mental health profession. And I think having family members that had been in the military, both during peacetime and during wartime, I just kind of got moved to work with them. I don't think I went into it knowing I would be here as long or thinking that I would love it as much. I just knew I was really interested and wanted to have that experience. And then when I got into working with veterans here at the VA, I realized what a wonderful career it could be. And so I've decided to stick with it, at least for right now.
Very, very interesting. Yes. I didn't realize how many people in our family are actually involved in the military. It kind of just like slipped my mind.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Um,
Uh-huh.
is
Yeah.
there any specific event or anything that really inspired you to become a social worker?
So my parents divorced. So my mom and dad went through a divorce when I was around 12. And that for me was a significant event, again, because I, as a kid, was just really trying to make sense of the world and trying to make sense of myself and my place in the world. And that was hard as a kid. Divorce is really a confusing experience. I remember hearing a lot about how my family was always going to be a family, but we were just going to look different. And when you're a kid, your worldview is just whatever it is when you were growing up. And so it was hard to envision my life with two households. And that was really significant because my dad went on to, your grandpa, went on to get married to my stepmom a few years later when I was around 15, 16. And so this other person came into my life, and I didn't know it at the time, but it was going to be a really beautiful and rewarding relationship and experience for me because she is a psychologist. And so the both my parents were very much into using mental health supports like therapy to enhance their own ability to recover from pain and suffering, to um, figure out their world and figure out how to be the best, man and woman they could be, to be the best parent they could be, and to take care of themselves. And then when my dad got married to my stepmom, she came in and brought a whole nother dimension to that healing as a psychologist. And I just got really curious about her job. She would talk a little bit about it. And so I think between seeing my family members, my mom and dad primarily, engage with the mental health system and like get benefit from it, right? They felt better. And I was kind of mesmerized by that of like, oh, they go and they talk with somebody and then they feel better. That's kind of neat. And then Catherine coming in and being a big influence. I just really felt really drawn to working in a field with people, working in a field where we would get to talk, and that would be the work. That felt really like it just fit my personality and my skill set. And to think that there was a way of talking with people that was healing. So those I think are the I think my parents' divorce and the recovery of that, of like how we stepped into a new version of our family and then became a blended family, and the evolution of that really, um, that was an impactful event. I think that kind of moved me in that trajectory towards wanting to move into mental health and a helping profession.
Thank you. That, yeah, that's really beautiful. Um, could you tell me what kind of people you work with most often?
Yeah. So in my current role, I am working with people, the age group is quite diverse, which is fun. I'm working with anyone between the ages of like 18 and 94. I had a 94-year-old veteran I worked with the other day. So the age range is very diverse. So we get people who are just beginning their adulthood, we get people in the middle part of their adulthood, and then we get people who are at kind of like the most mature stage of life, right? Being at that kind of final phase of life, right? Um, and in addition, I work with a wide array of types of people. So I work with veterans who identify as male, veterans who identify as female, veterans who identify as transgender. I work with from race and ethnicity perspective. I work with Caucasian veterans, African American, African identifying veterans, sometimes Latino. Those are probably and Native American. I'd say those from a race and ethnicity perspective, those are most often the clients that I see. From a diagnostic perspective, I see people, who are managing depression or anxiety or just like a general adjustment disorder, adjusting to some sort of big event in their life. I see folks managing bipolar disorder, which is a mood disorder that can cause a lot of stress in a person's life if it's um, not being managed well. I work with folks who are managing schizoaffective disorder, schizophrenia, more of that psychotic spectrum disorder. I also see people managing substance use disorders, primarily alcohol, the most often, followed closely by marijuana. And I also see folks who are, again, maybe on the older side of the spectrum, managing dementia or cognitive issues. Every once in a while, I see someone with personality disorder or a traumatic brain injury. And then probably most often something that you might imagine in the veteran population, a lot of folks managing trauma and their ability to either deal or not be able to deal very well with the impacts of trauma in their life. And that might be military related experiences like you would expect from someone who's been in combat, but also folks who are managing trauma from maybe unprocessed childhood experiences. It also could be both. So that complex trauma of folks managing both childhood experiences of trauma and also trauma they experienced as an adult.
Yeah, thank you. So you said you deal most often with veterans suffering trauma of like PTSD and
Mhm.
childhood trauma. And
Yep.
so, what kind of methods do you use to treat those veterans?
Sure. So again, right now I'm working on an inpatient mental health unit. And so what comes up most often is crisis stabilization. And so folks that I'm meeting are really in the thick of a crisis. They are not able to maybe manage the feelings that are coming up for them or manage the stressors that they're perceiving in their world. And so my job is to really help with stabilizing their mood. My team helps with medication. I'm not a prescriber, so that's not necessarily my um, that's not what I personally work on with them, but I'm doing more of the crisis stabilization. And so some of the things, is I use a lot of compassion, a lot of mindfulness skills. I use a fair amount of motivational interviewing, which is another evidence-based way of engaging clients. I often also use acceptance and commitment therapy, otherwise sometimes referred to as ACT. And that's like a way of doing business with folks related to values and centering on a person's personally held values as a way of helping them get committed to moving forward with their recovery. Um, I'd say more generally, the work that we do is there's another evidence-based way of kind of approaching this called illness management and recovery. I think more recently it's called just mental health recovery work. Um, when I was working in the outpatient side of things, I was doing more work with people doing trauma focused therapy, which would be more of that evidence based protocol where you would have really structured sessions. And it would either be like cognitive processing therapy or prolonged exposure. I'm not doing that with folks on the inpatient unit because it's not the right time and place often for people to engage, and they're not staying that long on an inpatient unit. But in the outpatient world, we would do prolonged exposure, cognitive processing therapy, narrative therapy at times. And then I'm also trained in psychoanalytic or psychodynamic work, which I think for me isn't like there's not a protocol for it, but I kind of embed and thread those techniques kind of throughout everything that I do. Does that answer your question?
It does.
Okay.
Thank you. That's very interesting. So are there like certain steps that a patient has to go through like in the recovery process?
Certain steps. Well, yes and no. So, in general, yes, I think there is kind of like a natural arc to recovery, right? And there might be, real generally, it might be like the early stages, the middle stages, and then more of those like later stages of recovery, of feeling really grounded in your mental health recovery. But also on the flip side, kind of holding space for the opposite of that to be true too, is that no one recovery plan looks exactly the same as someone else's. And so what I think our aim on the inpatient unit with folks is to help each person develop and create their own individualized treatment plan. Now, having said that, there's a lot of crossover between what people do. There's some kind of natural things that people do right away. I think in general, just to say a couple things about that, first part of a recovery plan really looks like stabilization. What do you need to do to get grounded in your life and to get grounded in some sort of routine or consistency to help you feel kind of stable and grounded and secure and safe. And so for a lot of folks, that looks like medication management. So talking with a person who prescribes medications about what might be helpful, right? Antipsychotic medications, antidepressant medications, mood stabilizers, things that really help with those neurotransmitters and kind of your internal biology. Then what we do is we also talk with folks about what else they in addition to that. And so that might look like being referred for some supportive therapy with an individual therapist. It could look like referring a couple to couple therapy. Sometimes we refer folks to programs too. So, for example, at my hospital, we have We have some substance use treatment programs, which we've got a couple. One is more of like a residential one where you go and you stay there for kind of like what you might classically think of like a 30-day treatment program. We also have what's called partial hospitalization programs, which are programs where a person kind of commute back before COVID, people would commute back and forth from home. So they'd come in a couple times a week and they'd spend 6 hours doing group therapy and group education, um, and then go home at the end of the day. We're doing all of that still, but we're doing it virtually. So now there are some partial hospitalization programs that are done through Zoom. Um, and so that's often a part of folks when they're coming out of crisis, most often, or to prevent going back into crisis. Those are probably the two times where folks use hospitalization or referral to a program, is either to help them step down after coming out of crisis or as a way of ramping up their services so that they don't go into crisis. Um, and then, yeah, otherwise recovery looks really different for everybody. Could be making sure that you're well balanced in like your physical body, your mental health, and your spiritual life. Sometimes going to church is a big part of folks' treatment plans. Other times, having structure to your day, like making sure you're either working if a person's able to work and if that's appropriate, or finding a place to volunteer and just having some structure to your day. Does that answer your question? Okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
And so that kind of brings me to more current events. How has COVID-19 affected how the VA and just social work in general, how's it affected how you do your job to help others?
Yeah, yeah, that's a really, really good question. So, I think that we went through probably the same like myriad of feelings that everybody did at the beginning. Oh my gosh, what are we going to do? Right? There was a little bit of that disbelief of like, is this really happening? How long is this really going to last? And so I think at first we kind of held strong and we're like, okay, we're still going to provide stuff and services to people in person. And then we really started realizing we were going to have to adapt and find other ways. So my inpatient unit, we became what was called a COVID cold unit, meaning that folks who were going to get hospitalized with us would have to go to the emergency room and get a COVID test first. And if they tested positive, we would send them to a different unit. But if they tested negative, they would come to our unit. And so that was something that was unique because it just was a different way of kind of coming into our unit than it normally was. Um, Also, as a social worker, I started providing a lot of my services via the computer, like we're doing right now. So instead of going onto the unit and seeing people individually, the nurses who were working in person the whole time through COVID would help the veteran get to a room on our unit where there was a camera, and we would connect that way. And I think there are pros and cons to that. On one hand, I was still really happy that I got to do my job and I could still see people and help people. But like I'm sure a lot of people can relate to, it just made things a little bit more cumbersome. It made things a little bit more depersonalized. There was just a little bit more distance between myself and the person. And so I do feel like sometimes the relationship maybe it I'm not sure if it suffered, but the relationship was just impacted, I think, by the fact that I was coming across virtually. Um, and I would eventually, when we got kind of really stable and things felt like they were a little bit more grounded and we had all the PPE that we needed, because I think for a while we didn't even have the kind of shields and things that we needed. Once we started to have the masks and the shields, I was on a rotating basis where I would come in once every 3 weeks for a week of work, and I would see people that way, and that was really lovely, even though we were all wearing masks and visors or those face shields. It was really nice to just still physically be in the same room with people, because I think everybody was feeling very isolated and lonely. And even as a practitioner, I think that's one of the ways in which COVID kind of impacted us. Um, we felt busier than ever. I mean, I don't think my workload changed at all with COVID. I know that's again different than some other people's experience, but I was still just as busy, working just as hard, and sometimes even harder because everything I did, I had to find a way to adjust because of COVID. So if I had to get resources to a veteran, I had to do it electronically or virtually, or I had to hand it off through a couple of people before I could get it to the veteran. Um, so there were certainly some hoops that we had to jump through.
Yeah. Yeah, COVID's been a crazy time. I can't imagine working with so many veterans, especially who aren't as
It's been,
electronically
yeah,
capable at times. But that brings me to
yeah.
my
The
next
the VA did a
question.
really nice the VA did a really nice
Go
mhm.
ahead. Go ahead.
Sorry. I was gonna say VA did actually a really good job of trying to get iPads in the hands of veterans. I mean, they gave out thousands of iPads to veterans locally here, and I know that was the case across the country. Is we tried to get cell phones and tried to get iPads in the hands of veterans so that we could still see them electronically because um, we didn't want people to go without care. But I know the homeless program and myself in the inpatient mental health unit, we stayed busy the whole time, the whole year. We did not see a dip in our business.
Well, that's amazing that they supplied so many um, iPads. That's really
Mhm.
amazing.
Mhm.
Okay. So my next question is, what is the hardest part about your job?
Um, I think I think probably two things. One thing is from more of a practical standpoint, it's really hard when there is limits to resources. And so, I think when there's limits to financial resources or limits to housing resources or transportation resources or therapy services, when I encounter those barriers to connecting the veteran with what they need, that's a really hard part of my job because it just requires us to try to get really creative, and it just takes sometimes it takes a lot of work and a lot of talking and a lot of connecting with different people to kind of figure things out. So sometimes I can find that to be pretty stressful. The second piece I would say is sometimes it can be really hard personally to work on a unit where I am mostly only seeing people who are in the midst of pretty significant suffering. I don't often see people who have made it through and are on the other side of their crisis, right? I work with folks who are usually in the thick of the crisis. So the thick of feeling sad or losing something that was really important to them or not knowing what their next step is going to be, right? The kind of worrisome not knowing that a lot of people have to sit with. So I think that can be really stressful of trying not to like take that on and how to just keep having my internal reservoir full so that I can keep giving to other people. So those are the two things that I think are most challenging about my job.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I can totally understand how that could be so hard to not take on that emotion.
Mhm.
That leads me to my next question. Do you ever find yourself like emotionally overwhelmed, and how do you sort of decompress after a hard day?
Yeah, it's a really great question, Jay. Um, so yeah, I feel myself getting overwhelmed because I'm human, just like anybody else. And so I'm naturally going to have my own kind of ebbs and flows of how I'm doing. I think in order to stay healthy, to do my job and to stay healthy, to feel like me every day, a couple of things that are really important. One is I work on an interdisciplinary team. Um, so I work with doctors, so psychiatrists specifically. I work with occupational therapy, recreation therapy, nursing, like mental health nurses. Um, I work with um, a pharmacist, and then social work. And so amongst that team, we do, or we try to do our best job of helping to take care of one another. And so we get to talk through and process a lot of the heavier cases that we're working on. And I find that to be incredibly important and a really beautiful part of the work that I do, that I'm never really truly alone carrying anything by myself, that I can always connect and debrief and process with other people on my team. And so that peership and that mentorship and that camaraderie is really important for me to kind of offload and not be the only carrier of somebody's story. The second thing is during the day, I have to take breaks. So it's really important that I take my breaks to either go and do some stretching and yoga, to eat my lunch, to go walk around, to go get a snack or to get something to drink. So making sure I stay hydrated and I'm eating and I'm taking breaks, so that physically I can feel like I'm doing the work is really important. Um, and then also for me, um, having a group of people that I can talk to professionally. I just in my personal life have some friends that are also in this field, and it feels so lovely to be able to hang out with my friends when I can, or like on Zoom right now, be able to talk and debrief with people about what the work is like. Um, yeah, so those I think are the things that I do the most often to just keep me going.
Yeah. Um, do you use any methods that you've learned like every day in your personal life to kind of just help you stay on track?
Oh, oh yeah. So I love mindfulness. And mindfulness for me is a bigger umbrella term that encompasses a couple of specific tools specifically for me. So from literally breathing and kind of teaching myself how to breathe throughout the day and stopping to do some intentional breathing throughout the day is a lifesaver. So I really am into, and sometimes I use apps on my phone. Sometimes I'll use the Calm app or um, the VA. Actually, the VA itself has come out with a couple of helpful apps for veterans that I have on my phone that I can use. And so just taking a moment to take a break, to center myself and breathe. The other thing that I use all the time is aromatherapy. So sometimes it's in the form of actual like essential oils, like lavender or something calming like that. Other times I use it in a diffuser. Other times I use it in a candle or in a chapstick or a lotion. But I use aromatherapy. That's that sense of smell and having something that brings some calm and peace to my life. That's always really helpful for me. Um, I also use the practice of self compassion very consistently. And self compassion is kind of three pieces. One is learning how to be kind to yourself and saying kind things like, you can do this, Brianna, or you've been doing a really good job today. So being kind to myself, towards myself, even or especially in times and moments of suffering. The second piece of self-kindness or self-compassion is mindfulness. So mindfully aware of how I'm feeling. So trying to kind of mentalize or like be aware of how I'm doing from moment to moment and taking a moment to like just reconnect with myself if I'm feeling a little overwhelmed. And then the third part about self-compassion is realizing that it's this common humanity. I am much more alike other people in this world than I am different. So if I'm going through a moment of suffering, just reminding myself that part of being human and I'm not the only one going through this. So I think those are the things I use pretty frequently.
Yeah. I mean, I know from personal experience being around you that you're very helpful at keeping the situation at bay. Um, you just have a very calm energy about you. which I think
Oh,
everybody can appreciate. You're just really good at handling situations. Um,
oh, thanks.
of course. So how does, or do you feel in a way like any self satisfaction with your job of helping people? Like, yeah, does it make you feel
Yeah.
good?
And yes, totally. I think that's a really great question because you are at that point in life, right, where you're kind of manifesting your adulthood, right? Like, where do I want to go? What do I want to do with my life? And everybody moves in the direction to some extent that is congruent with or like matches their personally values. And so I think early on, I realized that like I'm not very good at physical labor. I can't go in that direction. I'm not really good at like numbers and like architecture or analytical kind of stuff. That's not where I'm going. I just knew that I wanted to feel my way through life with my heart. And so I needed to be in a profession where I could show up and like talk openly about making sense of the world with somebody else. And so I think there's just something really beautiful about like, even though it can be really challenging and hard to meet people when they're in a crisis, there's something I think really beautiful about being able to see somebody rise up and see somebody recommit to themselves and to reconnect with their strengths and to feel like they've got, to find the energy to like move forward even in the face of a lot of stressors. So yeah, I think there's a ton of rewarding pieces about what I do. And for me, it aligns personally with my values of, um, personal growth and relationship and kindness and being connected to others and also my own spiritual beliefs. And so, yeah, I'll stop there.
Well, thank you so much. I've learned so much about the VA and social work. It's all been super interesting, and thank you so much for sharing. Um, there's so many things that I didn't realize. I didn't realize how much you actually do. And I think everybody is so thankful that you continue to work through the pandemic and how much you just do for so many people. Thank you for talking with me.
My pleasure. I'm so happy that I'm honored that you asked me. Thank you.